In the final years of the Second World War, as the battlefields of Europe became arenas of relentless mechanized destruction, a particular group of soldiers found themselves at the center of a brutal and often overlooked reality: the crews of German tank destroyers. Known as Jagdpanzer units, these men operated vehicles designed not for mobility or comfort, but for a singular, deadly purpose: to hunt and destroy enemy tanks. Their machines, including the Jagdpanther, Hetzer, and the formidable Jagdtiger, were engineering marvels on paper, combining powerful guns with heavily sloped armor. But behind the steel and firepower lay a far darker truth. Life inside these vehicles was defined by extreme physical strain, psychological pressure, and a constant proximity to violent death. Unlike turreted tanks, German tank destroyers were built with fixed guns mounted directly into the hull. This design allowed for stronger frontal armor and lower silhouettes, making them more difficult targets on the battlefield. However, it also meant that aiming required repositioning the entire vehicle, often under fire. For the crews inside, this limitation translated into a tense and unforgiving combat experience. Drivers had to maneuver with precision while gunners and commanders coordinated under immense pressure, knowing that a single mistake could expose their vulnerable sides or rear armor to enemy fire. Communication within the cramped interior was critical, yet difficult, as the roar of the engine and the deafening blasts of the main gun filled the enclosed space. Conditions inside these vehicles were harsh beyond imagination. Space was extremely limited, forcing crews to operate shoulder to shoulder for hours or even days at a time. The air quickly became thick with fumes from the engine and gunfire, often causing dizziness and nausea. Ventilation systems were inadequate, especially during prolonged engagements. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, freezing in winter campaigns on the Eastern Front, and suffocatingly hot during summer operations or in enclosed urban combat zones. Crews had little opportunity to rest, eat properly, or maintain hygiene, as the demands of combat left no room for comfort. The psychological toll was equally severe. Tank destroyer crews were often deployed in defensive roles, tasked with holding key positions against advancing enemy armor. This meant they were frequently stationary, waiting in ambush, knowing that discovery could lead to immediate retaliation. The tension of anticipation was relentless. Every sound outside the vehicle, the rumble of distant engines, the crack of artillery, the whistle of incoming shells, could signal the approach of enemy tanks or infantry. Once engaged, the violence was sudden and overwhelming. A successful hit might disable an enemy vehicle, but return fire was almost inevitable. One of the greatest fears among these crews was the threat of catastrophic penetration. Despite their thick frontal armor, German tank destroyers were not invulnerable. Allied forces, including Soviet and American tank units, increasingly fielded more powerful guns capable of piercing even the heaviest armor. When a shell penetrated the hull, the consequences were often devastating. Ammunition stored inside the vehicle could ignite, leading to explosions that tore through the interior. Fires spread rapidly in the confined space, leaving little chance of escape. Survivors of such incidents described scenes of chaos and horror, as crew members struggled to exit burning vehicles, often under continued enemy fire. The design of these vehicles also made escape difficult. With limited hatches and narrow exits, evacuating a disabled tank destroyer was a race against time. Injured crew members were particularly vulnerable, as their ability to move quickly was compromised. In many cases, the vehicle itself became a trap, sealing the fate of those inside. Even when escape was possible, the surrounding battlefield offered little safety. Crews emerging from destroyed vehicles were exposed to small arms fire, artillery, and the chaos of ongoing combat. As the war progressed, the situation for German tank destroyer crews grew increasingly desperate. Shortages of fuel, spare parts, and trained personnel meant that many units were forced to operate under suboptimal conditions. Vehicles were often deployed with minimal maintenance, increasing the risk of mechanical failure at critical moments. Replacement crews received less training, reducing their effectiveness and survivability. Meanwhile, Allied air superiority made movement during daylight hours extremely dangerous. Tank destroyers, despite their low profiles, were vulnerable to fighter-bomber attacks, which could destroy them with rockets or bombs before they even reached the front lines. On the Eastern Front, the scale and intensity of combat added another layer of hardship. Facing the vast armored formations of the Soviet Union, German tank destroyer crews were frequently outnumbered. Engagements were brutal and unforgiving, with little room for error. The harsh climate compounded these challenges. In winter, freezing temperatures affected both machinery and men, causing engines to fail and making basic tasks painfully difficult. In summer, dust and heat clogged filters and strained engines, while crews endured exhausting conditions inside their vehicles. Despite these hardships, many German tank destroyer crews demonstrated remarkable discipline and effectiveness. Their vehicles, when properly deployed, were capable of destroying enemy tanks at long range, often before being detected. Ambush tactics, careful positioning, and coordination with infantry units allowed them to achieve significant successes on the battlefield. However, these achievements came at a high cost. Casualty rates were severe, and the psychological burden of constant danger left lasting scars on those who survived. The end of the war did not bring immediate relief to these men. Many found themselves captured, wounded, or struggling to reconcile their experiences with the reality of defeat. For those who survived, the memories of life inside a tank destroyer remained vivid, memories of noise, heat, fear, and the ever-present threat of sudden death. Their story is a stark reminder that behind every machine of war are human beings, enduring conditions that test the limits of endurance and resilience. The horrors faced by German tank destroyer crews were not unique in the broader context of the war, but they were distinct in their intensity and nature. Operating vehicles designed for destruction in environments defined by chaos and violence, these men experienced a form of warfare that was as claustrophobic as it was lethal. Their story, often overshadowed by larger narratives of strategy and outcome, offers a deeply human perspective on the realities of mechanized combat during one of history's most devastating conflicts.